Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Every government, it seems, needs an enemy. It's almost fundamental, isn't it? A way to unify, to focus resources.
It definitely serves a political purpose, a rallying point.
But what happens when there isn't a clear, obvious enemy? Or maybe when the real goals are closer to home?
Well, sometimes one has to be invented.
And that's what we've seen unfold over the past few months, isn't it? An administration essentially constructing an enemy from an idea, this phantom called Antifa.
Yeah, a label that's been stretched and molded.
Exactly. It's been transformed, really, into this political justification for a huge expansion of federal power. And crucially, it's become a tool to attack the financial base of the opposition.
It started as this loose term for anti-fascist activists, people showing up to protests.
Right. Very decentralized.
Right.
Now it's officially branded a domestic terrorist organization. That happened through executive actions.
And that specific label, terrorist organization, that unlocks a whole suite of powers for the government.
We're talking about things like ramping up investigations, legally seizing communications, information.
And the big one, tracing and freezing money, all under the banner of fighting terror financing.
So our mission here in this deep dive is to really follow that chain of events, forensically, you could say. How did one single tragic act of violence become the spark?
The political spark, yeah.
And then how did this decentralized idea, Antifa, get written into law, essentially by decree?
Through administrative action, bypassing Congress.
And finally, the part that maybe hasn't gotten enough attention. How did this national security story merge with an existing investigation into campaign finance?
Right, pulling ActBlue directly into the crosshairs.
ActBlue, the main fundraising platform for the Democratic Party, turning it into, well, maybe the most important battlefield in all this.
And before we dive into the timeline, we really have to set the stage with this deep irony.
You mean the administration's own starting position?
Exactly. The baseline here is their own executive order from January 20th, 2025. Remember the title, Ending the Weaponization of the Federal Government.
I do. It was very pointed.
Extremely. In that order, the president explicitly condemned politicizing law enforcement, accused the previous administration of running a systematic campaign against its perceived political opponents.
And pledged impartiality.
She pledged to restore it. So what we're about to walk through, starting in September, is basically the administration adopting and arguably escalating the very tactics they swore very publicly to end just 8 months before.
So that initial order, the anti-weaponization one, becomes the yardstick against which all of this has to be measured.
It's the critical frame, absolutely.
Okay, so let's start where the public narrative really ignited. The story of this phantom enemy, it really begins with a tragedy that was instantly weaponized.
September 10th, 2025. Charlie Kirk.
Yeah, the conservative activist, founder of Turning Point USA. He was only 31. He was doing an outdoor speaking event on campus at Utah Valley University in Orem.
He was actually talking with a student, wasn't he? About mass shootings, ironically enough.
That's right. And then, just like that, the event turns violent.
It was around 12:23 p.m. Mountain Time. A single rifle shot hit Kirk in the neck.
Very precise. Fired from a distance, apparently.
Yeah, investigators determined it came from a campus building roof about 142 yards away. Precise, as you said.
And despite efforts to save him.
He was pronounced dead shortly after reaching the hospital.
So the investigation kicks off immediately, obviously. Big resources poured in. But the facts that started coming out almost right away, they pointed in a very different direction than the narrative being spun out of Washington.
That's the crucial part. The narrative got ahead of the facts. Massively so.
How quickly did they identify the shooter?
Within 24 hours. The next day, a 22-year-old named Tyler James Robinson surrendered. He was charged with aggravated murder.
And investigators immediately started looking for connections, right? Motive, links to groups.
Standard procedure. But here's where that huge disconnect happens. According to multiple sources inside the investigation, FBI, local police, they found absolutely zero link between Robinson and any organized left-wing group. Nothing connecting him to Antifa. Zero. The conclusion, with high confidence, was that this was a lone actor, motivated by a deep personal and ideological hatred for Kirk and his views.
Did they find anything specific about his motive?
They found a note he left for his roommate. It was chillingly simple. It just said, I had the opportunity to take out Charlie Kirk, and I'm going to take it.
Wow. So the reality on the ground from the investigation points straight at a lone wolf assassination. A terrible politically motivated crime, but singular.
Unequivocally.
And yet, the administration, its allies, they launched this massive coordinated messaging blitz before any of that was established. They basically overwrote the facts with their preferred story.
Preemptive narrative construction. It was incredibly fast. Ken Paxton, the Texas Attorney General, he was out there almost immediately.
What are you saying?
Declared it the work of a leftist assassin connected to the radical transgender movement. No evidence cited, of course. And he announced his office was launching undercover investigations into leftist terror cells in Texas.
So framing it instantly as war, not murder.
Exactly. It's about infiltration, enemy cells, not solving a specific crime. That language matters hugely.
And the White House amplified this.
Oh, absolutely. Pushed it out hard, ensuring it hit all the conservative media channels right away. Stephen Miller, senior White House official, went public.
What was his angle?
Claimed, again with no evidence from the actual investigation, that a vast terrorist network on the left was responsible. Vowed the administration would destroy progressive political organizations as a result.
Destroy them. Strong language.
And then President Trump himself drove it home on social media, talked about mayhem engineered by the left, uncontrollable chaos.
And that's when he promised the designation.
Yes, promised to designate Antifa a major terrorist organization via executive action.
Looking back, what's really striking is how the violence itself became the focus, not the person who committed it.
That's the key insight, isn't it? The lack of a real traceable conspiracy wasn't a problem for their strategy, it was actually what made it work.
How so?
Because the shooter was a lone actor, the act of violence itself became detached from any specific group. It became this floating signifier of terror, as strategists might call it.
Meaning it could be attached to anything.
Precisely. The ambiguity was the opportunity. It created a blank slate. The administration could then paint their desired enemy onto that canvas. They could pin the violence on Antifa or any group they wanted to target, regardless of what the FBI was finding.
So the speed of the political framing made the actual facts irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant to the political reality they were constructing. That reality was set in stone within hours, long before the investigation could conclude. The tragedy wasn't something to be understood through facts. It was fuel.
Fuel for a policy shift they seemingly already wanted to make. Okay, so that brings us from the spark the assassination to the next stage.
Yeah.
Actually building the phantom enemy in legal or quasi-legal terms.
Right. Within just 2 weeks of the assassination, Antifa goes from being this loose idea, this label, to something presented as a formal entity.
A terrorist organization by presidential decree, even though, as we said, the FBI, DHS, everyone described it as decentralized, leaderless. An ideology, really.
To make that leap, to designate this fluid ideology as some kind of coherent hierarchical enterprise that you could actually track and dismantle, they needed a history. They needed to build a backstory.
A usable past, as you put it earlier.
Exactly. And they did this through what really amounts to historical forgery. They cherry-picked one specific historical example.
Which one?
The 1932 German anti-fascistic action. It was a very short-lived group set up in the chaotic final years of the Weimar Republic by the German Communist Party, the KPD.
Ah, the communist link.
That was the key for them. They focused intensely on the KPD connection, claimed this historical precedent proved that modern Antifa had this centralized, foreign-linked, dangerous structure.
But the actual history of Weimar Germany and the KPD specifically, it's much more complicated than that, isn't it? And politically inconvenient for that narrative.
Hugely inconvenient. And completely ignored in the official documents justifying the designation.
What's the crucial context they left out?
The most fundamental part is the KPD's disastrous adherence to the social fascism doctrine, which came straight from Moscow.
Social fascism. What did that mean in practice?
It meant the KPD declared the moderate Social Democratic Party, the SPD, who were also fiercely anti-Nazi, as the main enemy of the working class. Not the Nazis, but the SPD.
So they were fighting other anti-fascists.
Viciously. It created this catastrophic split on the German left. The KPD spent incredible energy attacking the SPD, sometimes seemingly more than they spent fighting the Nazis. Historians widely agree this division was a critical factor that prevented a unified front against Hitler. It basically helped pave his way to power.
And the administration just ignored all that, focused only on the name and the communist link.
Completely. Ignored the fatal social fascism doctrine, ignored the fact that the 1932 group existed for less than a year, ignored that it has absolutely no direct organizational or ideological line to modern American Antifa.
Where does modern Antifa actually come from then?
It's much more recent. You trace it back to things like the 1980s punk scene, the rise of the Anti-Racist Action Network, or ARA, in the US and Canada. Groups like Rose City Antifa in Portland, formed around 2007.
And their structure.
Radically decentralized. That was the whole point. Often explicitly stated to make them resistant to infiltration, to avoid the kind of decapitation that hierarchical groups face.
So the official consensus from intelligence agencies, from the FBI, CRS, academics, that modern Antifa is an ideology, a highly decentralized array of autonomous groups. That understanding was consciously thrown out.
Set aside completely.
Yeah.
They needed the narrative of a centralized militaristic threat to justify the designation.
And that manufactured history paved the way for the formal step. September 22nd, 2025. President Trump signs the executive order, designating Antifa as a domestic terrorist organization.
The language in that EO was very deliberate. It wasn't vague. It was designed to paint a picture of a concrete, menacing organization.
How did it define Antifa?
Called it a militarist anarchist enterprise. Claimed it explicitly calls for the overthrow of the United States government. Said this enterprise, note the word, recruits, trains, and radicalizes young Americans.
And mentioned funding.
Yes, claimed it uses elaborate means and mechanisms to hide its funding and the identities of its operatives. Again, notice the terminology. Enterprise, operatives, recruits, all language designed to make a diffuse movement sound like, Spectre or something.
But as soon as it was signed, legal experts jumped on it, right? Pointing out there's no actual law allowing the president to designate a domestic group like this.
Exactly. That was the immediate, massive legal flaw. We have a well-established process for designating foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs, with specific criteria and review. There is no equivalent statutory authority for the executive branch to unilaterally label a domestic group a terrorist organization.
So if it wasn't legally solid, what was the point? What power did the EO actually have?
Its power wasn't meant to come from surviving court challenges. Its power was and is what we might call performative legality. It's about the administrative and political effect.
Yeah,
By simply declaring the designation, the president gave the entire federal security apparatus, DHS, DOJ, FBI, even Treasury, the internal justification they needed to immediately shift resources, prioritize investigations, open files, as if Antifa was a legally designated terrorist group.
So it's an internal green light, essentially. Bypassing Congress, bypassing the lack of a specific law.
Precisely. It tells every FBI field office, every Joint Terrorism Task Force, or JTTF, this is now a top priority. Dedicate resources to Antifa-related investigations. It gives them the political cover, even if the legal category itself is questionable. The whole system starts running based on that internal directive.
It's governance by memo, almost. Building policy through administrative paperwork rather than legislation.
That's a good way to put it. It achieves an internal objective, mobilizing the state against a target without needing the statutory framework. #TAG5. Operationalizing the ideological war.
And that mobilization didn't stay on paper for long. Just 4 days after the EO, the White House issues NSPM 7, National Security Presidential Memorandum 7.
Right. Titled Countering Domestic Terrorism and Organized Political Violence. If the EO was the declaration of war, NSPM 7 was the battle plan.
What made NSPM 7 so significant?
It's profoundly important because it told federal investigators, including the JTTFs, how to operationalize the EO. It directed them to coordinate investigations based not just on potential criminal acts, but on, quote, common recurrent motivations. And crucially, it defined those motivations as specific political viewpoints.
Wait, hang on. Targeting motivations.
Yeah.
Political viewpoints. That sounds radically different from how federal law enforcement is supposed to work. How did the memo define those viewpoints?
It was incredibly specific. The memo listed motivating viewpoints to focus on, including, and this is a direct quote again, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, and anti-Christianity. It also mentioned hostility towards those who hold traditional American views on family, religion, and morality. And it explicitly stated that the anti-fascist lie has become the organizing rallying cry used by domestic terrorists.
The implications of that are huge, aren't they?
Monumental. It completely flips the script on federal law enforcement. The bedrock principle is supposed to be predication. You investigate based on evidence of actual or planned criminal activity.
A crime has to be involved.
Right. But NSPM 7 directs the JTTF to scrutinize and investigate people and groups based on their protected political beliefs, their ideology. It essentially defines certain viewpoints as pre-criminal indicators.
So it creates this massive gray area where Just disagreeing with the government or holding certain views, anti-capitalism, for instance, could put you on the radar for a terrorism investigation.
That's exactly what it does. It gives federal agents the green light to monitor groups, open files, based solely on the content of their speech, their political views, before there's any evidence of plotting violence or breaking laws. It effectively turns the security apparatus into a tool for monitoring political opposition.
A mechanism for surveilling dissent.
Precisely. And then, to sell this whole package to the public, to build support for this expansion of power, they staged the roundtable on Antifa on October 8th.
Ah, yes, I remember that. It felt very much like political theater.
Pure theater, designed entirely to legitimize the EOO and NSPM-7. Notice who they invited.
It wasn't nonpartisan intelligence analysts or law enforcement veterans, was it?
No. It was partisan commentators, activists, people who had been victims of violence during protests. The focus was all on emotion, fear, anecdotes of violence. There was zero verifiable intelligence presented about any kind of centralized Antifa command structure.
And the claims made were pretty wild. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem.
She delivered the most inflammatory lines. Claimed the Antifa network is just as sophisticated as MS-13, as TDA, as ISIS, as Hezbollah, as Hamas.
Comparing a decentralized protest movement to major transnational terror groups and cartels.
With absolutely no intelligence basis provided. It was pure hyperbole, designed to equate domestic dissent with existential foreign threats.
And didn't she also make a claim about an arrest?
Yes, this was another key moment of propaganda. She claimed, again without any verification offered, that federal agents had arrested the girlfriend of one of the founders of Antifa, and she vowed to prosecute this person to get more information about the network.
Even though Antifa has no recognized founders, no central leadership.
Exactly. The claim itself reinforces the fiction of a centralized structure that can be dismantled if you just arrest the right people. It creates the image of a hierarchy that doesn't exist.
So the whole roundtable was about generating public fear and justifying the next step she mentioned.
Which was the crucial pivot. Follow the money.
Right, the money. Which brings us to what seems like the real target all along. This wasn't just about protesters in the streets, was it? It was always about the finances, the ability of the opposition to actually organize.
It looks that way. The financial angle seems central.
And to really grasp that financial strategy, we need to jump back in the timeline again, even before the Kirk assassination.
Correct. Go back to April 24th, 2025, months before Kirk's death. The administration had already put the opposition's financial infrastructure in its sights. Through a formal presidential memorandum, it directed the Department of Justice to investigate online fundraising platforms. The stated reason was looking for alleged straw donors, people donating illegally on behalf of others, and illicit foreign contributions.
Okay, investigating campaign finance integrity. But was it broad or targeted?
That's the key. The memo specifically named only one platform to be investigated: ActBlue.
Only ActBlue, the primary online fundraising tool for the Democratic Party and numerous progressive causes.
The very same. So this wasn't some new idea cooked up after the assassination. This was a pre-existing blueprint for targeting the Democrats' financial engine.
Was this part of a longer trend? Had ActBlue been targeted before?
Oh, absolutely. This DOJ investigation was really just the latest phase of a long-running aggressive campaign by Republican politicians and groups against ActBlue. For years, there had been congressional committee probes, public accusations.
What were the main allegations pre-Antifa designation?
Generally focused on two things. First, claims that ActBlue's security standards were too lax, especially for small, anonymous donations, allegedly making it easy for foreign money or fraudulent contributions to slip through. Second, the straw donor thing claims that big donors were secretly breaking up large contributions into small, untraceable amounts.
How did ActBlue respond to those earlier accusations?
They consistently and very strongly denied them, called the probes politically motivated harassment, a brazen attack on democracy, basically scare tactics to disrupt their fundraising, especially heading into election cycles.
Did critics point out if similar issues existed elsewhere?
Yes. Critics often noted that similar platforms used by Republicans face some of the same technical challenges regarding small online donations, but only ActBlue was being singled out for this high-level federal investigation ordered by the White House itself.
Okay, so we have these two tracks running in parallel for months. The emerging national security narrative around this phantom Antifa enemy and this pre-existing campaign finance probe focused solely on ActBlue.
Exactly. And the Antifa designation in September was the moment those two tracks were deliberately merged.
How did that merger happen?
The focus immediately broadened. It shifted from just targeting the alleged perpetrators of street violence, the protesters, to targeting the funders of the political ecosystem they were part of.
Following the money, as Secretary Nolan said.
Precisely. In October 2025, reports started surfacing that internal government lists of entities supposedly funding left-wing extremism and potential domestic terror now included ActBlue.
Alongside others.
Yes. Alongside prominent progressive donors, philanthropic groups George Soros and his Open Society foundations were frequently named. The correction was being explicitly drawn.
And the president confirmed this direction.
He did. Stated it very clearly. If they're funding these things, they're going to have some problems. The threat was unambiguous.
This whole approach, targeting the financial lifeline of your political opponents using national security tools, it feels like something you read about happening elsewhere.
It is. It's a clear domestic application of what scholars call the financial strangulation doctrine.
Explain that.
It's a set of tactics often used by authoritarian regimes or regimes trying to consolidate power.
Yeah.
They go after the financial viability of the opposition. They use the state's most powerful tools, financial surveillance powers, the threat of freezing assets, invoking laws around money laundering or, critically here, terror financing, to basically cripple their opponent's ability to raise money, organize, or campaign effectively.
So it's not just investigating some fringe protest groups anymore. It's the state systematically investigating and trying to paralyze the opposition party's main bank account.
That's the shift. Turning a political competition issue, campaign finance, into an existential national security threat.
What was the logic, the justification used to link ActBlue to terrorism? It seems like a huge leap.
The logic relies on a flawed but politically useful transitive property. It goes something like this. Step 1, administratively designate Antifa, this political ideology, as a terrorist group. Step 2, baselessly conflate constitutionally protected political fundraising, donating to that, causes you support, which is pure First Amendment activity with providing material support for terrorism.
So donating to a group, the protest could be framed as funding terror.
That's the dangerous implication they created. The chain, however flimsy, became ActBlue funds progressive causes. Some progressive causes engage in protests. Protests are labeled Antifa operations by EO and SPM 7. Therefore, ActBlue is potentially funding domestic terrorism.
Even if that logic doesn't hold up legally.
It doesn't have to hold up perfectly in court initially. The mere existence of the investigation, powered by the terror designation, is enough to justify using the most intrusive financial surveillance tools, normally reserved for cartels or actual FTOs, against a domestic political fundraising platform. It elevates a regulatory or campaign finance issue into the national security realm, legal and democratic implications.
This whole campaign against ActBlue, using the Antifa designation as the pretext, it really does sound like lawfare, doesn't it? Using the legal system itself as a weapon.
It fits the definition perfectly, and the constitutional alarm bells are deafening.
How so?
When the government singles out one party's fundraising platform based explicitly on the political views of the causes it supports, views the government itself labeled anti-Americanism in NSPM 7, that is, textbook viewpoint discrimination.
Which is unconstitutional.
Presumptively unconstitutional, yes. It triggers the highest level of judicial scrutiny. It's a direct assault on the First Amendment rights of association and political speech, the right of citizens to pool their resources to support causes they believe in.
But even if ActBlue eventually wins in court, years down the line, the damage is already done, isn't it, through the chilling effect?
The chilling effect is the immediate and perhaps the most significant victory for those orchestrating this. That's the real mechanism of suppression.
How does it work in practice?
Just the threat of a federal investigation under a terrorism banner is terrifying. The possibility that your donation could land you on a watch list, that your assets could be scrutinized or frozen, even if the claims are baseless, it makes ordinary citizens pause.
So people just stop donating.
Many do. They get scared off. They don't want the hassle, the risk. Meanwhile, ActBlue itself is forced to spend millions of dollars on lawyers, defending itself, money that would otherwise go to candidates and causes. So it bleeds the opposition financially while also intimidating its supporters into silence. The goal isn't necessarily conviction, it's suppression, making political participation too risky, too expensive.
When you put all the pieces together, inventing the phantom enemy, using executive orders to bypass law, weaponizing security protocols based on ideology, and then targeting the opposition's funding, it paints a picture of, well, democratic backsliding.
It's a textbook case. Democratic backsliding isn't always a sudden coup. Often it's the slow hollowing out of institutions from within. When the party in power starts using the state's coercive tools, the FBI, DOJ, DHS, Treasury, not to fight crime or real threats, but to investigate, intimidate, and financially hamstring its legitimate political opponents.
You're replacing the language of political competition with the language of criminality. Sedition, even.
Exactly. The power to label your fellow citizens enemies of the state becomes politicized, and that fundamentally undermines the norms and rules that democracy depends on.
So a single awful assassination becomes the origin story, the necessary myth to launch this whole new administrative order.
It provided that perfect emotional catalyst, the pretext needed for this sweeping weaponization of national security powers against domestic political rivals.
And the real, maybe cynical genius of manufacturing Antifa as the enemy is its permanence.
I think so. The enemy was deliberately defined not by a concrete structure or specific leaders you could arrest or members you could count. It was defined purely by ideology, these broad, mutable concepts like anti-capitalism, anti-Americanism, hostility to tradition.
Which means it can never really be defeated.
How do you defeat an idea? Especially an idea defined so broadly. It creates this enemy network that can perpetually expand. Any protester whose sign looks vaguely radical, any donor supporting a controversial cause, any academic critical of government policy, they can all potentially be fitted into this Antifa network narrative whenever it's politically convenient.
The threat landscape expands or contracts as needed.
Exactly. Which means the expanded executive powers justified by this threat, the powers granted through the EO and NSPM 7, they never need to be relinquished. The enemy is permanent, so the power is permanent.
Antifa started as just this vague political label, an idea. And now it's become the actual architecture of expanded state power.
And that really leaves us with a profound and frankly disturbing final question for you, the listener, to think about. Our whole system rests on the idea of fair political competition, right? That's the bedrock.
Yes, it's supposed to be.
So what happens when one side starts systematically using the state's power, its investigators, its financial regulators, its ability to label people terrorists to try and financially and legally paralyze the other side?
It changes the game entirely.
It suggests that sometimes, maybe the end of democracy here doesn't arrive with a bang like a military coup or even in silence. Maybe it arrives in the calculated bureaucratic weaponization of paperwork, executive orders, internal memos, reinterpretations of regulations.
Leaving us asking what guardrails actually work anymore. When the executive branch finds ways to sidestep Congress, sidestep statutory law, using these internal administrative tools.
That's the critical space we need to watch now. What remains effective when the rulebook itself is being rewritten by administrative fiat?
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.